in the housing market come to a standstill. Potential new home buyers have hit the pause button.
Ontario's housing minister on the slowing state of home construction across the province.
Ontario promised 1.5 million new homes by 2031, but the province is already falling behind, missing its 2024 target by tens of thousands. The market has stalled, builders are frozen, and families are losing hope as affordability slips further away. At the center of it all, Premier Doug Ford is caught on camera snapping at reporters, his frustration going viral as critics circle. The man who once bragged about a housing boom is now the face of a meltdown. So the question is, can he survive the storm he helped create? The market hits pause.
Now, the fear I keep hearing is, will we be forced to sell the home we love just because of this renewal? I want you to know you are not powerless here. Banks rely on you being too stressed or...
If you thought Ontario's housing frenzy could never end, guess what? The music finally stopped, and the silence is deafening. Not too long ago, people were fighting tooth and nail over suburban homes, throwing down hundreds of thousands over asking just to win. But now buyers have backed off completely. It's like the crowd at the party suddenly disappeared, leaving sellers and developers standing awkwardly in an empty room. The frenzy has cooled so much that bidding wars feel like a relic of the past. Something people talk about in disbelief over coffee, like, remember when 10 people lined up to buy that rundown bungalow? And it's not just Toronto where things have frozen. The chill has spread to Hamilton, Kitchener, London, places that were once branded as the next hot markets. Those same cities are now covered in for sale signs that barely get a second glance. Homes that once would have been snapped up in a weekend now sit collecting dust for months. The entire scene feels upside down. One year it was pure madness, and the next everyone is just waiting. Buyers are spooked, watching the headlines, convinced prices will tumble further, and sellers are panicking as their dream profits slip through their fingers. The developers, they're not exactly rushing to save the day either. Builders who once couldn't move fast enough to break ground on new projects have suddenly slammed the brakes. Why? Because the market is frozen. Their word, not mine, and they're not wrong. Construction cranes that once dotted the Toronto skyline are now eerily still, almost like symbols of a boom that has run out of gas. Even in smaller towns, local builders are sitting on permits, waiting for some sign of life before they commit. After all, why pour millions into projects if nobody is buying? The scandalous part here is how fast the confidence collapsed. Families who were desperate to get into the market a year ago are now holding back, scared to make the biggest purchase of their lives in such uncertain times. The panic that once drove prices up has flipped into hesitation that's pulling everything down. It's like everyone suddenly realized the stakes were too high and decided to fold their cards all at once. What was once treated like a gold rush now feels more like quicksand, sucking in anyone who dares to step forward. And if you think the government's big billion-dollar incentive fund would fix it, think again. Sure, the province dangles rewards to cities for hitting housing start targets, but developers aren't biting. They know the truth. Permits and promises don't matter if buyers won't show up. Builders are saying it flat out. The market is stalled, and no amount of political spin will change the fact that confidence is gone. What makes this all the more dramatic is that Ontario was supposed to be building its way to salvation. Remember the promise of 1.5 million new homes? Well, if this pause continues, those targets aren't just slipping, they're a fantasy. And at the center of it all, you've got sellers stuck with houses nobody wants, builders too scared to build, and buyers frozen on the sidelines. The so-called unstoppable Ontario housing machine has ground to a halt, and everyone is pointing fingers. The gossip is loud, the frustration louder, and the market dead quiet. The billion-dollar debate. With the market already at a standstill,
hopes of spurring more development. The current fund rewards cities that hit housing start targets. But municipalities have argued building permits they issue are a better measure to qualify.
The Ontario government rolled out what they thought was a golden ticket, a billion-dollar incentive fund. The idea sounded flashy. Cities that hit their housing start targets would get rewarded. It was supposed to kickstart the stalled machine and prove that the province was serious about tackling the housing crunch. But of course, like everything in Ontario's real estate saga, nothing is ever that simple. Instead of applause, the plan sparked one of the juiciest political battles we've seen in years. Municipalities fired back almost instantly. Their gripe? The fund only counts actual housing starts, not permits. And mayors across the province were furious, saying it was unfair. To them, permits show intent. They're the first step, proof that cities are doing their job. Permits are homes in waiting, one official argued, practically accusing the province of moving the goalposts. But Premier Doug Ford's government wasn't having it. They doubled down with Housing Minister Rob Flax, bluntly putting it out there. Permits are not homes. We want results, not paperwork. That line, permits are not homes, has now become the soundbite of the entire debate. And honestly, it's scandalous in its own way, because while it's technically true, it also exposes just how out of sync the province and municipalities are. Cities feel like they're being punished for factors outside their control, like developers sitting on land and refusing to build because the market is frozen. Meanwhile, the province insists that without real foundations in the ground, nothing matters. It's like watching divorced parents fight over who's more responsible, while the kids, aka buyers and renters, are left waiting in the cold. The gossip in political circles is that Ford himself loves this tough guy stance. By brushing off the municipality's complaints, he's trying to project control, showing he won't water down his targets. But behind the scenes, it's not looking so strong. Ontario has already fallen short of its housing promises, missing its 2024 target by 25%. That's not a small miss, it's a massive one. And to cover the gap, the province quietly started bending the definition of what counts as housing starts. Dorm rooms, retirement homes, even long-term care beds are now being tallied toward the goal of 1.5 million homes by 2031. Talk about creative accounting. The scandal writes itself. A province spinning numbers to make itself look better while families can't find a place to live. Opposition leaders are eating it up, accusing Ford's government of gaslighting Ontarians with fake housing starts. And the public, they're catching on too. Every time they hear about a billion-dollar fund or some new policy tweak, they look outside and still see construction sites sitting idle, houses unaffordable, and builders refusing to take the bait. The fund, in many people's eyes, is just lipstick on a very tired pig. What makes this even more entertaining, if you can call it that, is the tug of war between levels of government. Cities want recognition for the permits they push through, saying they've cleared red tape and done their part. The province dismisses that, insisting the only thing that counts is shovels in the ground. The truth? Both sides are right and wrong at the same time. Permits don't house people, but neither do empty promises from developers who are too scared to build in a frozen market. So here we are. A billion-dollar debate that was supposed to jumpstart construction has turned into another shouting match. The premier is getting testy, municipalities are crying foul, and the opposition is gleefully pointing fingers. Meanwhile, Ontarians just want affordable homes, but instead they're watching politicians argue over definitions like it's a reality show. And with every month that passes, the gap between promises and reality grows wider. The fund was meant to be bold, but right now, it looks more like a political band-aid slapped over a gaping wound. Falling behind on promises?
That's 4 months. By starting at 6, you give yourself 2 full months to prepare before you're even eligible to sign anything. That prep time is golden.
Here's where the whole thing starts looking less like leadership and more like a cover-up. Remember how the province proudly promised to build 1.5 million homes by 2031? That number was supposed to be the big solution, the headline-grabbing pledge that would finally fix affordability. But now, the cracks are showing, and honestly, it feels like Ontario is falling behind faster than anyone wants to admit. The goal for 2024 was 125,000 new homes. Sounds ambitious, right? Well, they didn't even come close. The province barely managed about 75% of that target, which means tens of thousands of families who were supposed to have new options are still stuck waiting. And instead of coming clean about the shortfall, the government pulled a move straight out of a magician's playbook. They changed the definition of what counts as a housing start. Suddenly, dorm rooms for students, retirement homes for seniors, and even long-term care beds are being added to the tally. Technically, they're beds, but let's be real. These are not the affordable family homes people have been begging for. It's almost scandalous how casually the government tried to spin this. Look, they say, we're still on track, but everyone watching knows the math doesn't add up. Counting a dorm bed as a new home is like calling a motel room a permanent residence. It feels like padding the numbers to save face, and people aren't buying it. Opposition MPPs have already slammed the province for moving the goalposts, accusing them of treating Ontarians like they wouldn't notice the sleight of hand. Meanwhile, out in the real world, the consequences are painful. Families are crammed into rentals with skyrocketing prices. Young couples are stuck living with their parents. unable to save enough for down payments. Entire generations who were promised that relief was on the way now feel like they've been conned. The promise of 1.5 million homes has gone from hopeful to laughable, and every missed milestone only deepens the sense of betrayal. Developers, of course, aren't blameless either. Many are sitting on land they could build on, but refuse to start projects because they don't think they'll make enough profit in this frozen market. So even when permits are issued, nothing gets built. Municipalities are furious, pointing fingers at the province and saying, "Don't blame us, we approved the projects." The province claps back with its "permits aren't homes" line. And who gets caught in the middle? Ordinary people who just want a roof over their heads. The gossip in Queen's Park is that Doug Ford's team is scrambling behind the scenes, desperate to make the numbers look less disastrous before the next election cycle. That's why they bent the definition of housing starts. It's not about solving the crisis, it's about optics. But here's the thing, Ontarians aren't stupid. They can see the cranes sitting idle, the half-finished condos, the empty promises. No amount of creative math can cover the fact that the housing dream is slipping further and further away. So yes, Ontario set itself a bold target. But with the way things are going, it's not just falling short, it's failing spectacularly. And the Premier, instead of admitting the gap, looks more and more like he's trying to spin a fantasy. The province isn't catching up, it's falling behind, and every Ontarian locked out of the market knows it. The Premier under fire.
Homes immediately. They'll eventually result in homes, but not immediate.
That, as Ontario's own data suggests, it's falling further behind on its goal of building 1.5 million homes.
By this point, Doug Ford isn't just struggling with policy failures. He's caught in the political firestorm of his life. The housing market, once his favorite bragging point, has turned into a nightmare that follows him everywhere he goes. Reporters grill him at every press conference, opposition leaders hammer him in the legislature, and viral clips of his angry outbursts are spreading like wildfire. What was once a premier who spoke with swagger now looks like a man cornered, his composure slipping in front of millions. You can see the shift in his tone. At first, Ford tried to laugh it off, saying the downturn was just temporary and that Ontario would bounce back. But when the questions kept coming, why did he miss housing targets? Why were families drowning in debt? Why were builders refusing to build? His patience snapped. In one infamous exchange, when asked about the government's failure to meet its own housing goals, he lashed out at reporters, accusing them of fear-mongering. The clip went viral within hours, not because it was shocking Ontario was failing, but because the Premier looked rattled, defensive, and out of touch. And the opposition? They smelled blood in the water. Green Party leader Mike Schreiner blasted the government for clinging to a broken incentive program instead of making bold reforms. The NDP accused Ford of protecting developers over families, pointing to his refusal to consider a public builder that could actually use public land to create affordable homes. Even the Liberals piled on, saying his government lacked audacious leadership and mocking his spin tactics, like counting dorm beds as new homes. Each attack landed harder because the public mood had already turned sour. The frustration spilled out into the streets too. Families who bought at the peak and are now buried under massive mortgages have started showing up outside Queen's Park with signs that read, "We lost everything." Instead of sympathy, Ford doubled down, telling people markets go up and down and that they needed to be responsible for their choices. That comment blew up instantly, fueling the narrative that he didn't care. Social media lit up with outrage. Ordinary Ontarians, already furious about the collapse, now saw their premier as cold and dismissive. In the legislature, things got even uglier. During one heated session, when the opposition pressed him on whether he manipulated the housing start numbers, Ford slammed his desk and shouted that no one could have predicted the crash. The footage was replayed endlessly on the evening news, painting him not as a strong leader under pressure, but as a man losing control. Instead of calming fears, he was fanning them. The scandalous truth is this: Ford's anger has become part of the story. His visible frustration isn't just about politics. It's about a premier who can't hide that the weight of the meltdown is crushing him. Every word, every soundbite, every glare gets dissected online. And the more he tries to brush it off, the more people see a leader unraveling. For a man who once stood tall as the face of Ontario's booming housing empire, the fall has been brutal. Now, instead of bragging about record-breaking sales, he's on the defensive, fighting to convince Ontarians he still has a plan. But in the eyes of many, he's not in control anymore. He's under fire, and it shows. Everyone's got a fix, or so they claim.
For a upturn in the market, in the real estate market, so you can jump right in as soon as you can. When you hear any of this stuff,
Once the housing crisis became impossible to spin, every political party rushed in with their own miracle cure. And let me tell you, it turned into a circus of competing promises, each one louder than the last. Instead of real solutions, it felt more like a shopping list of desperate ideas, designed more for headlines than homes. Everyone wanted to look like the savior, but behind the shiny proposals, the same ugly truth lingered. The market was frozen, and no one had the key to unlock it. The Green Party went first, with leader Mike Schreiner arguing that the simplest way forward was to give cities cash to eliminate development charges on starter homes. His pitch was that, by wiping away those fees, young families could finally get a shot at affordable housing. On paper, it sounds clean, fast, and even a little heroic. But critics were quick to whisper, would this just shift the burden to existing taxpayers? After all, if cities lose revenue from development charges, someone else has to foot the bill. And in Ontario, property taxpayers are already stretched thin. The NDP had their own bold idea, a public builder. They promised that if the province used public lands and took the lead on development, it could slash costs and cut out greedy private developers who've been sitting on land waiting for the right price. They painted it as a return to old-school, government-led housing projects, complete with low-cost financing and grants to keep prices down. It was radical compared to the usual let the market decide mantra, and it definitely got people talking. But again, whispers spread. Could a province already struggling with debt really take on the role of a full-time developer? Then the Liberals jumped in, determined not to be outshined. Their solution? Go big on tax cuts. Scrap the provincial share of HST on new homes. Eliminate the land transfer tax for first-time buyers and seniors. They called it bold, audacious leadership. It certainly sounded dramatic, and it got plenty of headlines. But skeptics pointed out that while tax cuts might make buying slightly cheaper, they don't magically create more supply. In a frozen market where builders refuse to move, shaving off fees won't convince them to start pouring concrete. Meanwhile, the Ford government stood its ground, clinging to its billion-dollar incentive fund and brushing off every other plan as unrealistic. Permits aren't homes, they repeated like a broken record. But the problem was clear to everyone watching. The fund wasn't working, targets were being missed, and the market was still stalled. Ford looked stubborn, like a gambler doubling down on a losing hand. And through all this political noise, ordinary Ontarians rolled their eyes. They didn't care about flashy talking points or who scored points at Queen's Park. They just wanted affordable places to live. To them, all these competing fixes felt like more political theater, while their rent kept climbing and home ownership drifted further out of reach. The gossip around dinner tables wasn't about who had the best plan. It was about how hopeless the whole thing felt. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.